So welcome everybody we are now on day 3 of the Festival of Learning, which if you're not aware, is London Funders annual flagship kind of learning event. So every year we sort of book out 2 weeks to just come together with our members to share learning and be inspired and challenged by funders and civil society and other change makers to really sort of build our thinking and learn together. And we know how difficult it is to make space for that when we're all really busy. So we sort of try and carve out those 2 weeks every single year. And this year we have over 35 festival sessions. They're on loads of different topics and themes, but they're sort of categorized under 8 core themes, which we know are really sort of top of mind for funders at the minute. So I'm not going to list every single one here. You can go have a look at the Festival of Learning website, which I'll post a link to in the chat in a minute. But we are exploring themes like systems change, risk, resilience, collaboration, all things process. So loads of things for London Funders members and their trustees. I know there's some of you here today to get your teeth stuck into. So really excited for this session, which is all about trustees. I'm going to hand over to Penny in a minute, but I just want to let you know that this session is being recorded, and this will help us write up the festival, the sort of post-festival report that we do every single year, and share that learning out with the wider membership. But if we do go into a discussion a little bit later on, we will pause the discussion, pause the recording so that you can kind of feel comfortable sharing whatever is on your mind. We are also encouraging speakers and attendees to get involved online and share what you're learning. So please do kind of post on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, if you're still on Twitter, but we're not very active there anymore. But yeah, do feel free to kind of share your learning on social media. And if you can let us know which organisation you're joining us from in the chat, that would be great. We'd love to know who's in the room. So yes, I hope you enjoyed this session. I'm going to hand over to Penny now. Thank you.
Thanks, Milena, and hi everybody. So this session is how to make an impact as a trustee of a grant-making charity. I'm Penny, I'm an inclusive governance consultant. I used to run a charity called Getting On Board, which was a trustee development and diversity charity. It trained 10,000 trustees a year. And as of last night, I joined my 5th board, not simultaneously. That would be mad, although I'd love to hear if any of you in the room actually have many going on simultaneously, because it's, you know, it happens. I'm also a member of the London Funder Talent Bank. So this session is all about impact, isn't it? And we become trustees because we want to make a difference. So how can we make sure that we are? How can we make sure that we're actually having impact? And for those of you that work with trustees, so for example, if you're a CEO working to a board, what can we do to make sure that we're getting the most out of these brilliant trustees that we've recruited? Because I don't always think that we do. So we've got this fantastic panel. We've got Alison, Inno and Geraldine. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a sec. But I just wanted to say that if you have reflections, experiences you want to share, if you have resources that you think would be useful to share, please do stick them in the chat. If you have any questions, put them in the chat or put your hand up. As Milena said, we're going to turn the recording off later in the session if you don't want to ask your question or make your comment while we're recording. So panel, if I could ask you to briefly introduce yourselves and tackle the first question, which is a really juicy one. What does unhelpful trustee behaviour look like? And Alison, let's come to you first.
Is it just me or I can't?
Okay, you know. Okay.
I was saying I couldn't hear. It's probably my network, sorry.
I think it's
okay. Sorry. Okay, hello. Thank you, Penny. Thanks for this opportunity. So I'm Alison Braden, and I'm here wearing the hat of the trustee at the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. I'm quite a new trustee there. I've just been there since September. And it's the first time I've been a trustee of a grant-making trust. So this little world is quite new and interesting. I had no idea grant-making was such a profession and a whole thing in itself. So that's been really interesting. And previous to that, other trustee roles I've had have been at Quakers in Britain, which is quite kind of large and diverse, kind of like wide range of different activities within that, and of quite small organisations like Dada Fest, which is a deaf disability arts organisation in Liverpool, and Rape Crisis England and Wales, another infrastructure body, and various other smaller, so sort of trustee roles in different sized organisations. I've also been a chief executive of a rape crisis centre and of a youth, kind of a national youth arts organisation. So I've sort of always try and see it from both angles. But yeah, currently at JICT, I was trying to think of, because you perhaps this is an unhelpful trustee. I was going to tell you, here's a newbie bit of unhelpful trustee behaviour from a newbie grant making trustee person, which is, it's really important not to give the impression that, you know, to a potential grantee that you can give them money, because you know, when you're a trustee of another organisation, you spend your whole time enthusing about, you know, kind of going, oh, it's great, yeah, come and get involved. We're really inclusive. Everyone's really welcome. You know, come and join us. This is our unit. But as a grant maker, you have to be really, really clear with those boundaries, because you can be really welcoming, but anything you say can, like, you know, people really want to read into it, don't they? And then you put all your staff in a difficult position. So I'm not saying that's personal experience. I'm just saying I have to be really careful with those boundaries. And I'm really noting that as a newbie grant making trustee.
Thanks, Alison. That's super interesting. Ino, can you hear us now? Do you want me to repeat the question?
I can hear you, and if you can please repeat the question, that'll be really helpful.
Yeah, so we'd love a quick introduction to you, and then tell us what you think unhelpful trustee behaviour looks like.
All right, that's all right. Do you want me to go then?
Yes, please.
All right, that's okay. So I'm here today wearing the hat of newly appointed trustee as treasurer at OVO Foundation. This is my first trust role, so everything is new to me essentially. So I don't have the wealth of experience that everybody has. In terms of what unhelpful really looks like, I think when you go into any new role, there's always this preconceptions that you bring into it, as in like most people, like I'm a numbers person by profession, so I'm a financial controller, so I focus on numbers. So most of the things I look at them from the lens of, right, what am I doing with this money? But that's a particular lens that might not be very helpful for a specific for grant making. I think from a grant making perspective, the critical question is to be, what are we achieving with this particular kind of finding? What exactly are we doing with it? So I think it's probably important every now and again to remove the hat of whichever profession you're coming from, to actually think about and delve deeply into what are the missions, what are the purposes for which we're making the grants.
That's a really good point. And I guess there's two aspects to that, isn't there? There's being less operational and more strategic, and there's making sure that we're getting our heads around, in your case, the non-financial aspects of being a trustee. So not always zeroing in on the one thing that we're really, really confident about.
Yeah.
And I'd love to come back I'd love to come back later on to other trustees and their attitude to finances and numbers, because you're probably the reverse of many trustees.
Yeah, that's all right. We can come back to it.
Cool. Geraldine, you've got plenty to do. You've got plenty left here, but I left you till last. But I think there's still a long list of very unhelpful trustee behaviours.
Oh, there's so much. There's so many different unhelpful behaviours. It's difficult to know which ones to pick. So I am Geraldine. I've been a trustee at the John Ellerman Foundation for about 8 years. So I've been in this game for a while. I'm also a trustee of some other organisations, but the John Ellerman Foundation is the grant making one. And one of my pet bugbears is people who say, I'm just going to play devil's advocate, because I think often, you know, grant making foundations have thought really carefully about the diversity of their boards, you know, needing people with finance expertise, needing people with, you know, a real understanding of the grants they're making. And so I think you have to trust that there is diversity of opinion already on your board. And so you don't need to play devil's advocate. I always think, if you think something, just say it. Don't pretend you're saying it for the purposes of doing, just be honest about what you think about it. So I don't think that's particularly helpful.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Just own an opinion.
Own it. Yeah, say what you mean.
Yeah. And I think we're not great as listeners, and I'm massively generalizing here. I think sometimes trustees, and I include myself in this, aren't always great at listening. So we can have a stance before we go into a meeting, and we don't go into a meeting thinking, I'm desperate to hear what Alison, and Geraldine think about this. I might change my mind. I think this, but I'm not sure. And just kind of being a bit more humble and a bit more open to coming out to the decision being something that we might not have expected.
Yes, yes, absolutely. My other choice was trustees who are really opinionated.
Oh, tell us more.
I think this goes back to having a direct, if you've got a good board where you've got lots of skills and experience, you don't have to have an opinion on everything. It's fine to listen to what other people have to say about it and to think, if I'm not the expert in that area, then do I need to have an opinion about it?
And actually, like really underutilized words on a trustee board are I don't know.
Yes.
And like for lots of reasons, because I'm not an expert, because I haven't got all the information, because I don't understand that yet, because I'm new, Alison, and I'm new, I need to learn more, I'm not an expert. And I think that kind of holding forth on everything.
I was about to say, you've just empowered me there, right there. I was like, that's going to be my new go-to. I do not know.
Yeah. And like we can role model that, can't we? So if we're the trustees that have been on a board for longer, it's really helpful to role model the I don't know on things. I don't know, I need to learn more. I guess the I don't know has to be followed by what am I going to do about the fact I don't know?
Yeah.
Very true, yeah.
And Alison, what do you think if I was to ask, a sample group of 100 charity CEOs what the most annoying trustee behaviours are? What kind of thing do you think I might get back?
Well, I was going to say the opposite of it. It's the trustees who don't engage. And I don't necessarily mean they're not turning up. I mean, that's annoying as well. But there's the sort of I think, if you've worked really hard, like you say, to get a board, you've got lots of different experience, bringing lived experience or kind of beneficiaries and that kind of thing, or you've got people who've got particular skills that you need, but people don't engage. And you phrased it in kind of quite a blaming way and kind of saying, what are they doing that's annoying? But I think, if you've created an environment in which, these very hard found kind of skills and experiences are there, and when people are not engaging, that's really annoying. But I think I wouldn't necessarily put everything on that individual, because it's about all the other people around the table and about you as a chief executive as well. Like, are you presenting the questions or the information in such a way that this person is just not seeing how valuable they are or how useful what they have to say is? Or are you not being very accessible? Or are you deferring too much to somebody else? And all those sorts of things. So I think personally I find that the lack of engagement more frustrating, and that perhaps perhaps I feel a bit more confident kind of interrupting someone if they're talking too much there.
Yeah. And this is leading perfectly into the next question. And Geraldine, I'll come to you. I see your hand up. What stops trustees from being useful? 99.99% of trustees have joined in good faith, haven't they? Because they want to make a difference. So what happens when they're not useful? What are we doing wrong?
Can I jump in as somebody who's just joined, so that I can share some of my thoughts as someone who's new? So to some extent, it's almost there could be a very long list of things that could be happening in someone's head. So the first one is the point, that's the empowering point of I don't know, and not being confident enough to actually raise your hand and say I'm actually not comfortable with the direction that we're talking about right now. The second thing, which Alison, you really pointed out, there was people not being confident with the sets of people that are around them, for example, just not creating the right connections with those people. Maybe that second one might be managed by bringing people in a room together and have them talk to each other, because that's much easier than having conversations over Teams and stuff like that. And maybe to some extent it might just be a lack of skill sets. Maybe some people don't actually have the confidence, the skill set that they need for the particular conversation, and then they kind of draw backwards and inwards, essentially.
Thank you. Geraldine, what would you add to that?
Well, I would imagine it's not difficult for a grant-making charity to recruit trustees, because you're joining a board where you get to do some really nice stuff. You're not joining a board where you're having to constantly worry about funding and, staffing and all of that kind of thing. This is a place of some privilege. And so there's something about that. So grant making charities can be really selective about who's on their board. And we are clearly in a transition phase, aren't we, from it being a kind of great and good type activity to proactively, consciously, a diversity of experience and knowledge, and expertise. And I think, I think sometimes the balance between not being engaged enough or being too engaged, if you bring in people who are really passionate about the work and who understand it in great depth and who are from the sector or have lived experience of the issues that you're making grants around, there's the kind of flip side of I'm just way too engaged in this, and I want to know everything, and I want to get my hands on it. And so I think that can be a real challenge. It's that balance, isn't it? And that's a trustee thing on any kind of board, isn't it? You need to be able to hold back and be strategic. And
yeah, if you have staff, if you're organising,
true.
doing the doing, absolutely. And I guess that line between board and staff responsibility, it moves as well. So it's not even as straightforward as getting to grips with it in that organisation and then sticking on one side or the other.
Yeah.
So in terms of some of the ways that we make it harder for trustees to be effective. So we've talked about, not being accessible enough, not getting the right information, having some dynamics where you're not comfortable, you're new, so you haven't got the kind of social connections, the personal connections with people. Are there ways in which we make it harder for some trustees to be effective than others? So is it harder if you're coming from outside the grant making world, Alison? Is it harder if you're 30 years younger than the rest of the board? Is it harder if actually all the board, 2/3 of the boards are very close personally and know each other personally, and you're coming in and you feel a little bit isolated from that? Are there situations in which it's harder to be effective? Geraldine, what do you think?
I think that the work of a grant making foundation is often really, really complex. I think it's not just as simple as we're going to give some grants out. Most grant making foundations will have some kind of endowment or will be having to raise funds to give out, and that's a whole different skill set. The thinking about how we do the grant making is complex. I think what hinders the trustees, I wonder whether sometimes we have a bit of an image in our head of how a trustee, how a trustee should behave. I'm I'm going back on the opinions bit. I'm just going to sit here and give lots of opinions about everything. And there's a job of work to be done, isn't there, to bring your board with you in a way which enables them to be effective. And there's also a job of work to be done by the chair, I think, in making sure that you've either got the right people around the table or you are supporting them to become the right people. So good chairing, I think, is absolutely essential and is something that can really hinder trustees.
I couldn't agree more. And like coming back to what Alison said about, the way I framed one of the questions was as if it was the fault of the trustees. But actually, I agree. It's not always the case, is it? We make it hard for people sometimes. And if we're not on the ball in terms of chairing and induction and training and recruitment and who we've got round the table in the first place, really, really hard for us as individual trustees to actually have an impact. So we've kind of been looking at some of the negatives, I guess, when it goes wrong, what's poor behaviour. But let's get back to the positives. And I started there because I thought it would be juicy. And I wanted our attendees to kind of think, oh yeah, this is interesting. But let's get back to the positive. So if we're talking about having an impact as trustees, what do we actually mean by impact for trustees? Alison?
Well, I think for me, it's going to be things like making sure that the decisions you're making are really like robust and really challenged and really looked from different sides. So I feel like, if I come away from a meeting feeling that those proposals have been really tested, and genuinely tested from different points of view, and they've been looked at from risk angle, they've been looked at in terms of finance, they've been looked at in terms of strategy, that's when I feel like I've been really effective. When something's been nodded through, that might have been the right thing, but then that makes me a bit nervous as a trustee, and as a chief executive I always felt really nervous if something just kind of went through without any questions. When no one asked anything on finance, I'd be kind of like, was it really okay? So there's something about that testing. It's kind of, I think of it sometimes like it's like a crucible, isn't it? It's kind of like you're burning everything away and find, trying to get to what's the right decision. And I think for me also there's another thing about everyone in the room understanding what you're doing. So things like so if you touched on talking about risk, and I think this is a particular issue with grant making, and when you're at such a distance from the work that's being done or the risks that are being taken in your name, we hold it, don't we, as trustees. So there's something about making sure everyone understands that, really understands it, and is not nodding that through because we're holding it in a really truthful way. And I think likewise with about the impact and the reach from beneficiaries, because that's it's such a long way away. So there's something I would feel that I'd done well as a trustee if I felt that everyone in the room, not just me, had kind of gone away really confident that they were happy with the level of risk. I mean, JRCT is we're quite comfortable. We fund some like pretty risky organizations doing quite difficult piecework, and we're happy funding really small grassroots organizations, kind of on the edge, working around charitability and things is quite challenging, but we can see that the work is really effective. So but everyone in the room has to really understand that. So those are some of the ways I feel like I come away feeling like I've made a difference as a trustee, if I feel like everyone's really understood that.
And I'm really interested that you're not a chair currently, but actually you see your individual role as making sure that everybody
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, the chair kind of like is keeping an eye on it, but everyone in the room has that role. It shouldn't just be one person whose job it is to make sure. So, and I think particularly those of us who hold any kind of privilege, whether that's white privilege or class, which two things I'm very comfortable, I've got plenty of that. But I would say it would be particularly on me to be, and I talk a lot as well, and I always have to watch that, but it's particularly on me to kind of like shut up if I'm talking too much, and kind of going, actually, do you know what, we haven't heard from Hannah for a while, who's trustee on our board, who's younger and has so many great things to say, but sometimes I do need to kind of go, shut up.
Yeah.
And so it's on all of us, definitely.
Yeah, great, thank you. Let's come to you. So for you, you've just gone through the process of joining a board, so this is probably really fresh. What does impact mean for you as a trustee?
So I think I'll look at it from the lens of from a numbers lens to start with, because I'm a numbers person. So it would be good if we could have things that we can actually measure to say this is the impact that we're making. So if there's some mechanism that we can use to measure some of the things that we're doing in a community, that would be really helpful, because then at least you can tell the story in a much more meaningful way. But that's coming from a numbers person. Now to the person that I want to become, which is less of a numbers person, I think the key thing is for me to remember what difference am I actually trying to make. It's not just about how many beds we are providing in a specific care home, for example, or stuff like that, but it's also a question of like, what difference is it actually making to the people who are in that space? Maybe as a last thing for me will probably be a question around like, are we learning from the previous things that we've done in the past? So if we've made specific grants in specific places, have we gone back to check what the learnings are, what the successes were, and what the failures were?
And this is another really interesting answer, not just what you're saying, but the fact that so far, and I'm going to come to Geraldine in a minute, you've kind of interweaved personal impact with governance, board impact, with organizational impact, and those three levels kind of, and both of you have seamlessly jumped from one to the other. Geraldine, what does impact mean for you as a trustee?
I think as a trustee of a grant making organisation, Well, two things. I think the one is that, we are incredibly privileged. We have a lot of power. So we need to be taking risks. We need to be at a kind of the right place where we are not comfortable. If change is not a comfortable thing, and that is in effect what all grant making organisations are trying to do is fund change, isn't it? So we need to be, if we're in a place where we're uncomfortable and we're feeling kind of excited about that, then that for me is where we can have the biggest impact. And I think there's also something about the not just focusing on the grants. This is not just about making grants. We have all sorts of other assets. We might have investments, we certainly have kind of, a voice, we have power, we have the way that the whole organization behaves. So I feel that I'm part of an impactful organization if we're talking about all of those things.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you. I'm going to move us on because I'm looking at the time, and I wonder if we could have some kind of quick fire answers about what you think trustees, and let's say trustees generically, and we'll come on to grant making trustees specifically. What do trustees need to know to be effective? In your first few months as a trustee, what do you think trustees need to know to be effective?
I think if I was to give a simple, quick answer, it would be just to be deeply engaged in what the mission is. What is it that we're trying to achieve with this institution before we think about what money we're pushing out the door?
Yeah, so knowing the organisation and its mission. Absolutely. Geraldine?
I think it's really important to know the other trustees, to know the people around the table and know what they are bringing and respect and understand that.
Absolutely. Alison?
Need to know the truth. I
Hey,
mean, you need the information, and you need, all of it. And having been a chief executive, I know how tempting it is, and how you do tell a story, don't you? And it's very difficult to, but your trustees can only support and challenge you if you're telling the truth. I think there's something for me as well about compelling stories, because if you're going to do any of your kind of ambassadory type roles, you need to have those little stories, and again, this sort of distance that you are back. And I'm noticing, particularly in grant making, even more so than the other infrastructure bodies, you're at such a distance from the stories which keep you motivated and enable you to tell the story of the organization, is those whatever they are, because your mission might not be about people, but yeah, so I'm sort of noticing that, and I'm feeling it as a bit of a gap at the moment. That's no criticism to my team, it's just that I haven't found them out yet. But
yeah,
yeah.
What an interesting list. So we've got know the people, know the organisation, know the truth stroke information, and know the stories, so that we can be ambassadorial. And I'm going to add, know our legal responsibilities, know the scheme of delegation, I think, of course. Knowing the field, so and we're going to come on to grant making, and maybe knowing the numbers. Let's come to that. What about knowing the numbers? Do you have any thoughts on the general kind of trustee understanding and engagement with numbers?
To be very honest, my experience has been with numbers, it seems to be quite intuitive for most people in terms of being able to relate, to say, look, with this type of funds, what can people actually achieve? Is this going to go the long way? Not necessarily being trying to do the actual accounting role, as it were, but actually just knowing how much goes how far. Essentially, I think that people are quite comfortable with. When it comes to all the other regulatory pieces about what the HMRC wants us to do, that people are generally less comfortable with it, but that's expected, because that goes into technical areas. But I feel like there's almost a balance between the intuitive and the legal, if you call it that.
And actually, I think that that's a really good case for why people like Alison are on grant making boards, isn't it? Because having that running a frontline charity experience, and it isn't always intuitive for everybody how far money goes when you're running an organisation. Great, thank you. And I guess I said to know, but it's also to understand, isn't it? We need to understand things. how do trustees need to behave to be effective? And we've kind of touched on this from the poor behaviour point of view, but what is the positive side of this? You know, what should we have in a trustee code of conduct about trustee behaviour? Geraldine?
I think curiosity
Mm.
is really important. I think being able to listen and be reflective on what you know, what you don't know, what you're learning. I think being respectful of what not just the other trustees know, but also what the applicants are, what the applicants know. You know, so really important to not say, oh, well, they could probably do that for less, or do they really need to do it like that? So respect, I think, is really important.
What a brilliant list. Thank you. Is there anything you'd add about how trustees should behave?
I think to the point that's already been brought onto the table, it's about building strong relationships as well, not only with external people, but also internally with the rest of the trustees, so that at least the conversations, to the point we were talking about earlier about having effective meetings, effective conversations, that can only come from strong relationships. I think that'll be an important thing.
Really important. And I guess, that makes me think about Alison's thrust around, actually it's all of our responsibility, isn't it, to make sure that happens. Yes, we'd love an excellent chair who's going to facilitate that, but if we can see it isn't happening, then it's up to us to make sure that we're making those relationships strong. Alison, is there anything you'd add to the list, or any comments on what's been
yeah, we need to be really brave.
Tell us more. Love that.
Well, I think it's important in lots of ways. And I suppose it's the more difficult side of being a trustee when you're chief executive. And I'm not talking about any of my current organisations, just to be clear, but experience long in the past. But when I've had chief executive of senior leadership team who are struggling for whatever reason, it could be illness or intermittent illness, or personal circumstances, or you've got a flat structure and people are not getting on. And as a trustee, you have to be really brave to recognise that and know that the tools you have are really blunt and not great, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes and do things in ways you don't want to. So, but that is the right thing to do for beneficiaries. I think I was also thinking of an example that at JRCT, obviously we've been looking at the origins of our endowment. I know there are lots of grant makers who've been looking at that, the origins in enslavement, and that's hard to look at, and you have to be really brave to look at it and to own the benefits that I've had as a white woman in from the results of that, and then just being really, I don't know, it's like grappling with it, and everything about you wants to look the other way, but kind of going, no, you have to own that power. And I think that is a particularly, as Geraldine was saying, as a grant maker, you do have lots of power. And again, there's also a thing of a trustee, you have power, but you don't have lots of tools. You can only work through your staff. So there's a real kind of tricky grappling that you're doing that's around power and being willing to look at things and make difficult decisions as well. So I think bravery is really important. I think alongside the listening, has to be both.
Yes, yeah, and I hear you when you say your thing is talking too much, because I have the same problem. So every board I've ever sat on, I'm having a word with the inner Pratt that I believe we all have. Be quiet, speak less. I believe we all have an inner Pratt that we need to talk to. So that kind of self-awareness about what we're good at on a board and what actually we need work ourselves on a board, I think is really important. So what I'd love to come on to next, and attendees do feel free to add questions, resources, experiences, reflections into the chat. I'd love to come on to how we can possibly know as individual trustees whether we're any good. How might we, you've talked about what it means for you to have impact. How do we know? How do we know if we're any good? Geraldine?
Well, I guess, I mean, you added self-awareness at the end of the last collection of things. I think if you're fairly self-aware, then you have a good sense of whether you're participating in discussions in a useful way, whether you're bringing evidence or experience to this. But I think probably just ask for feedback. Ask for feedback from the team, ask for feedback from the chair, have a coffee with one of the other trustees after the meeting.
Yeah, great. And what about formal ways, as a chair, in terms of appraisals, or they're often not called that, or reviews, or contribution reviews, I often hear them called. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts on those?
well, we at the Element Foundation, we have every trustee has an annual appraisal, and then all the trustees appraise the chair. And I think that is a really useful discipline that I've used on other boards as well. I think it works both ways in terms of people being able to raise issues, people being able to get feedback.
Yeah, great, thank you. What would you add? How do we know if we're any good as trustees?
I think what's been said, I'll probably agree with what has already been said in terms of asking for feedback as a starting point. I think the next thing for me would be having the attitude to being open to actually change. Because if you don't have that as a preset attitude of saying like, I do want to make an improvement to myself, whatever feedback you're going to get is just going to land on deaf ears, as it were.
Yeah.
And having that continuous self-reflection and being able to adapt as you go along would really help us well, to some extent, first appreciate that there's something that I need to improve on, and then make the learnings as you go along.
I think that's so powerful. That's such a powerful point to make. And I guess reminding ourselves why we're there in the first place. We take these roles because we want to make a difference. We want to be useful. And I think sometimes we can kind of lose that a little bit. And there's a real danger with trusteeship that we forget about it between meetings, or that we forget about it between committees. We don't think about it very much. So, being open to change and actually giving it some thought. Alison, is there anything you'd add?
Yeah, I think about it all the time, I have to be honest, but perhaps that is just a new thing. Perhaps that'll tail off. It's just, anyway, no, I did have a good, I was thinking there's the other side of it. One of my most prized bits of feedback I got was from a chief executive who said I was a thorn in their side. Which is a negative one, isn't it? So, but obviously they said, and he was just saying it motivated me. You never shut up. You just, which is true. I persist. Anyway, so I suppose I was thinking there are also times when you are the person who's provoking the change that needs to happen, when you're the person who's making everyone uncomfortable. So yes, certainly self-reflection, certainly taking feedback, but sometimes, you'll have a truth. You'll be the person who's got the eye on where you need to be, and how you tell the difference is really hard. I was thinking that some of the things I've done, like recently when I've been struggling with a conversation, I went to a colleague in another grant making trust and just said, what's normal? What do people normally do in the circumstance? I don't have experience. I'm chairing the finance committee, which is not, I've been a chief executive, but I haven't been a finance director. And I don't know, like what should I do? So I was thinking about that as having frames that are outside of your organization. Just stress that wasn't because there's any major problem. It was just me trying to learn to do something better.
Yeah.
And I was also thinking about how often I use lists, like going through the governance code, or going through if you've had like a consultant or something who's done it from years ago, like, have we done this? So I was just thinking those are ways you can check which are like outside of a situation.
Yeah. So using external governance reviewing, whether it's a consultant coming in to do a review, using a tool yourselves. Yeah. Do you think that being useful looks different for different sorts of charities? And what is specific to grant making organisations in terms of what trustees need, how they need to behave? And we've touched on this a little bit, but is there anything that we've missed, Geraldine?
I think that kind of good governance skills are probably fairly the same. I'm sure, Alison, you said this earlier, you need a sense of humility to be sitting on a big pile of money and making decisions about who's going to get it. You need to really understand your own power and privilege. You need to be thinking about who's, and I think you need to be extra careful about who's around the table and the kind of mix of expertise, whose voices are in the room.
Yeah, and we're going to come on to that because I know you did some work on that, John Ellerman. Thank you. And are there, for people who are coming onto board who are perhaps who haven't been in the grant making world before, are there resources and organisations that you would recommend, Geraldine, that people take a look at?
ACF, they're good.
Yes, yeah.
Yep, I did some investment training with understanding investments training with ACF when I started, which is very helpful. I think I think that we try and bring people in from other organisations on a fairly regular basis to talk about the you know, what's happening in the sector and with, you know, the various things we need to know about.
Mm.
Obviously London funders.
Yes, obviously we must plug them.
Obviously London funders.
And I'm going to ask Milena's question that's just come into the chat because it mirrors my next question exactly, more or less. So Milena says, we often hear from grant makers that their boards and trustees can be the biggest blocker in doing things differently, taking more risks and sharing more power with those that they fund. Why do you think that is, and how can we change that? Who'd like to take that first as you're digesting it?
I think you could get that from the staff in our charity. I think there are different things behind that. It is a really big question. It's a really important one. My feeling is that sometimes, actually, this isn't particularly about JSCT, so this is a general thing. Sometimes it's that communication bit between trustees and staff. We don't often do that very well. I certainly haven't done it particularly well in the past. And I also think we don't communicate well about what we are actually doing and you know, what decisions we have made. And so, you know, there's that classic thing of a trustee make a decision as a trustee, but the actual work will, you know, can happen quite a long time down the road. And we're not always kind of all that open about, you know, the different reasons we make for that. So I think that's something that we could definitely do better, because sometimes it looks like something doesn't happen because trustees don't want it to happen, but it might be that there are all sorts of other factors.
There might be some good reasons that just
there might be good reasons, and people might disagree about those reasons, but if you can kind of say, but these were our reasons, then people kind of go, okay, well, I disagree, but I can see the decision was well made. So that's sort of one thing. I think there's also you know, there's a thing, again, this is not about my current organisation, so I'm being really careful about this because I don't want to, you know, cause difficulties for my current staff. So I'm talking about previous organisations, but where we have staff who are really passionate change makers and who are activists and who are just, you know, much closer to the need. Trustees not necessarily further away from that, but when you're wearing the trustee hat, you're doing the strategy work, and so you can end up with a really unhealthy dynamic when everyone is actually wanting the same thing, but you can get stuck in a bit of a kind of like, well, we're the people who want to make the change happen and you're the people stopping. So you can get stuck in that, and sometimes that can end up being generational as well, which is also very unhelpful. So I think so partly communication, but also there is a culture thing, which I think is common across kind of the charity sector. But I think because of the heightened levels of kind of power and the distance between trustees and impact within grant making, I just wonder, this is me speculating, I'm new, I'm wondering if it gets a little bit heightened there. But I also, having said all that, I'm sure it is also true. I'm sure there are plenty of trustees, and I'm sure there are times when I have blocked things. So I'm not denying all those things. I'm just observing a couple of other things. I always really welcome that as a challenge, and it makes me think. So I'm always glad of it being raised.
Can I come in there? I think also there are really good examples of where trustees have really driven the change. So if you look at an organisation like Lankelly Chase, the way that their board changed and then the whole direction of the organisation changed in a very radical way. I think the really interesting question there is about who appoints the trustees. You know, the trustees are appointed, you know, new trustees are recruited by current trustees often. You know, not all of grant making charities are like that. Some of them are appointed through other methods, but there's a you need a bit of a yeah, there are some kind of levers for change there, which are sometimes a bit vague and sometimes a bit hidden and can move very fast or can move very slow.
Interesting. So far we've had a bit of pushback that it's not always the trustees that are the least progressive ones. We've had, perhaps we're more aligned than we think and we just need to communicate better. Sometimes we can't go as fast as staff might want us to, and there's good reason, so better communication. And we've had Geraldine talking about recruitment to boards and the fact that trustees appoint trustees often. You know, one of the reasons why this might be the case, the thing that Milena is talking about, is because trustees, because of who we appoint to boards. Inno, what would you add? And Alison.
I think most of the points have already been mentioned. One of the things I'd say is sometimes it's a question of an understanding of what the change is perceived to be. So not everything that's considered as change is taken as a positive change. And I think in some cases, people conflate change with positive change. So there could be some instances where I genuinely think the direction that you're trying to take is probably not the right direction that we would want to go at this time. And therefore, I would stand my ground in that case as a trustee to say, right, this is not the direction I think we should be going. And that might actually be coming from an understanding, a miscommunication or a misunderstanding between the grant makers and the trustees in terms of like the strategy and where we're trying to go. So maybe it comes back to Alison's point in terms of being able to communicate more frequently, more clearly about what is the direction, what impact we want to make, what differences are we actually trying to achieve. And there could be disagreements about which route takes us there faster, but at least if you share a common goal, I imagine the route to get there, you could have some differences around it. But if you share a common goal and you know exactly where you're going, you tend to agree a bit more and you tend to move a bit faster. So I suspect there might be something in there about not sharing the common vision in a common way.
That feels like a really fundamental point, doesn't it? That if we're not aligned on that, then our idea of where we're going and how we're getting there and how fast it's going to take is really flawed. Alison, can I come to you for a very quick point so that I can move us on?
Oh, sorry, it was just a quick one. I was just gonna, it was a plea in for the value of stability. I was thinking about looking over the pond to the US and what was going on with how important it is that the trusts and foundations there are holding onto their values and being kind of stable and not changing. So I mean, I know the kind of changes we're talking about are probably the progressive ones that we would all want, but I've been really kind of looking at that and kind of going, actually, sometimes really holding on to something is really valuable. So it's just been, as always, challenging to thinking in both ways.
Thank you. So panel, I'm going to skip to the last question you've got on your list so that we can do the really meaty one after we've turned the recording off. And anybody watching this recording, you should have come live. There's a lesson for you. You're going to miss out on something juicy. But if we can come to the last question, and it's a quick fire one, can you please give 2 or 3 tips for trustees of grant making charities to help them be more effective? What would your tips be?
I'd say probably go back to what we've already mentioned. Being professional in what you're doing and knowing that you're bringing something to the table and being brave about it and being confident to keep going.
Thank you. Geraldine?
I think be self-aware, be human. Don't feel like you have to behave like a trustee.
I love that. That's going to be my motto. Be human. Alison?
Mine was really practical. It was go to your investment committee or meet with your investment managers. And while you're there, imagine describing it to one of your beneficiaries and try and hold those 2 things in your mind.
Oh, good one.
So try and come away with an explanation that's going to make sense to anybody.
Yeah. Also that you can live with ethically, because that is really, really hard because they are such different worlds. So I think that's a really good trustee thing to do.
That's a really good practical tips. Thank you. So Milena, can we thank you for everybody who watched remotely. Milena, can we turn the recording off, please?